All right. So on the process side of Marcel's diagram, this is sometimes, there's definitely a lot of good software for to help you manage these types of things, but a lot of times you just need to get your thoughts down, on a piece of paper or in this case, a spreadsheet. And so here's a quick template that I set up. And this, some of these things might relate to your agencies and some might not, but at least to get you think about all the components. And then this spreadsheet also touches on some of the pain points that we were just recently discussing as well. So real quick, enter your price at the top here. You've got some direct expenses that you're going to outsource to contractors. And so, that's a fixed hard cost that you have that's getting factored in there. And then you have your internal resources and, making sure, you're getting your data, you're tracking people's time. But, if you have stuff in here to know, hey, what goes into each project, then okay, what level do I need to track time at? How detailed do I need to be? Do I know everyone is tracking time? Does that include my contractors that are kind of acting like employees? I'm paying for their software, so that cost has to come in. I'm managing their time, and that puts an extra burden on me. And so all those factors go into how many hours it's going to take, and then also what the cost is for each employee. What is their internal rate per se? Is it just their base salary? Is it their base salary plus their taxes plus benefits plus some overhead amount that covers software and other costs? And so you should be thinking about all those things and how it affects your total costs. And so, this line, so that's your total cost for internal hours, your total cost of services, cost of goods sold, and then what's your gross profit margin from this project. Now, on the right here, we have, sometimes it depends on how you're doing pricing. You might just say a fixed flat fee. Hey, we're going to do this project for 50,000. But depending on the client and how you're trying to pitch that value, you might want to have more of a breakdown of the specific components in there. And here's where we could, apply a markup and, show specific lines individually and what those costs are to the client. And then also on the team side too, what I did here is I took the rest of the balance and I backed into an hourly rate. So if you really want to show an hourly rate to the client, you could put it here. But that should be an internal decision. It's just this worksheet is more just having all that information there, so you could think about what's the best way to present it to the client. Sorry, go ahead.
Never mind. No, keep going.
This capacity side, so this is, and we didn't get into this too much today, but just thinking about more of the components that go into setting a price. What is your internal capacity? What do you have space for? If you have, if you're fully booked up and everyone is really busy, then you should be setting higher prices because you don't have the capacity to take on new clients. Whereas if you're in the middle of a pandemic and you have no work whatsoever, then you're setting your prices a little bit lower in order to at least get people working. And then the other aspect here is coming up with a close rate, and this is where you actually need more data to feed into this. But after you have a lot of more experience and some data, you could get a better idea of like, okay, what level do I price at that gets me, to signed contracts at the end of the day? And you don't want 100% signed contracts. That means you're pricing way too low. If you only sign 10% of your contracts, you're pricing way too high. So you're trying to find a balance in there that matches, what your capacity is and what you're capable of, and how many new clients you want to bring through the door.
I love this, man. I mean, this is a great way to think about it. And I have a big question, I think, and Marcel, I mean, I'm sure you have some really good points on this too, but like, if you would like to share an hourly rate with the client, or they ask, and they have this total contract value, what is the strategy there? Because I assume showing a client $265 an hour would freak the client out and get them to go shop hourly, which you don't want them to do. But what is the strategy there? What's the strategy with showing that hourly rate? Or maybe you just show a different hourly rate and you just mention that this doesn't factor in miscellaneous or doesn't factor in blank, blank, blank. What do you guys, what do you suggest?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, it depends on how you're pricing things and what you think your value is. If you think you're providing a lot more value by managing, some of those direct expenses, then you could put more of a markup in there. So, hey, for, photography, we're going to charge you $5,000, even though it's only going to cost us $2,000. And so you could kind of, put some time into that as well. You could also break it apart. So you could say, okay, for designers, we're going to charge you, you know, $75 an hour. For copywriters, we're going to charge you $80 an hour. And then for strategy time, we're going to charge you, $250 an hour. And so you could break it down that way as well.
Or you just take out the project altogether. You just say, hey, part of this is a project fee for the website. I can share the hourly. We pay out hourly for, content, photographer, whatever. That's going to be $100 an hour. And then we have a project total for the site, which is just our cost to do a site. You could maybe get away with that. But any ideas there, Marcel, on strategy and what you suggest?
Yeah, I'm going to put my sales guy hat on for a minute here. And I think the first question that I would ask them is, why is that important to you immediately? Because this is probably in a context where you're not selling a time and materials project. You're selling a project that has some kind of a flat or value-based fee. So I would immediately answer that question with like, well, why are you concerned about that? Why is that important to you? And then I would probably start to play a bit of a deferral game of like, well, that's not really how we think about it. We think about our pricing more in terms of like what it's worth to you and what kind of benefit you're going to get. And, then I would check in on like, do we need to circle back to like what kind of outcomes you're going to get from this? And I try to go back and anchor the value. And then I might actually get to a point where I just defer that question altogether by saying like, well, we don't really look at hourly rates internally. This is what we charge. We have some contractors that we pay this much. And we have to make sure as a business that we have a little bit of profit in there for ourselves. So we don't really kind of think in terms of hourly rates. Like that would be the default answer if I really wanted to avoid it altogether. Because you're right. I think as soon as we slap an hourly rate on it like that, it can really freak the client out, even if it makes complete economic sense for them to pay us 10 grand so they can make 100. And I think that's really what I would try to steer the conversation back to, and just try to basically dodge that question altogether by playing the dummy that doesn't keep track of their hourly rate and being like, well, we don't price that way. We don't really think about it that way.
I love it.
Yeah. If you are just selling your services at an hourly rate, this model does look a little different. You could say, hey, what are you trying to get done? Okay. We think that's going to take 100 hours. It's, $100 or $150 an hour or whatever it is. And there's your final price. I mean, you want to have an hourly cost in there to be thinking about that. But there's less of a pricing and a cost structure model involved if you're doing that just pure hourly rate.
Yeah, and I do have one more question. It's a great suggestion and if you are raising prices, let's talk about this real quick and line items. So if I'm looking at raising my prices, let's just say I want to 150% my prices, right? 1.5 times, right? Where do I go in and look at those different line items and decide what to raise, and is it an hourly raise? Is it just a flat percentage? And then I go and fill that in somehow. I mean, what do you suggest there? Or is it just, hey, I'm going to raise my price and it's just a pure margin raise? What do you suggest?
Yeah, it depends on what you're presenting to the client. So if you're giving all this detail to the client, then when you raise your price, you need to think about, okay, how am I allocating that down onto the different line items? But if you just, go in with a pure value play and say, okay, my price is now 100,000 instead of 50,000, then all these other things stay fixed, and we just increase our margins, on that new price. And so it depends on, so how you're using the worksheet depends on how you're thinking about that. If you flip over to this capacity worksheet, here's a kind of shows the margins based on those different prices. So everything else stays the same from a cost perspective. If you increase this from 50,000 to 100,000, you're just bumping up your margin, and then you have more going to your bottom line.
Yeah. So I would kind of echo what Ryan is saying. I think it all depends on what your pricing strategy actually is. And if you have a value-based pricing strategy, then what's important is to reconcile, is the price I'm asking for going to allow me to have a healthy enough margin to make this work? And so you basically just want to check, if I charge this much and it takes us this amount of time, which we, have a fairly reliable idea that that's what it's going to take, am I making at least 50 to 70% gross margin on this project? If it's south of that, then green light, all systems go, put that in front of the client and try to get them to close. If you're more in a complex, pricing strategy where the client asks you for something and then you have to go and kind of figure out how many hours you think it's going to take and then create a price based on that cost basis, then I would look at, again, targeting a specific gross margin and then setting up your hourly rates as, as being relative to your cost to try and get there. And you might simplify this by looking at a blended rate. You might look at rates per service. Doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, you just kind of want to look at increasing that average hourly rate so that you land in a gross margin area that's healthy for you.